Happy Webinar Wednesday, everyone. My name is Pam Greensky, and I'm the Director of Operations here at Advisicon, and I'd like to welcome you all to today's webinar, Tips and Tricks for Building an Effective Project Schedule. A quick summary of who we are here at Advisicon. We're a group of authors, teachers, consultants, technologists that care a lot about helping organizations learn, grow, and scale through blending methodology and technology to deliver results. No matter your company's size, our A-team specializes in maximizing your business and personal productivity by leveraging the Microsoft technology experience. We offer bi-weekly webinars, sometimes weekly, mostly bi-weekly, which here at Advisicon we refer to as Webinar Wednesdays, in which we spend 30 minutes to an hour each week teaching topics that range from Microsoft Project, Project Server, Project Online, Power BI, Visio, SharePoint, to project, program, and portfolio management, and methodology approaches. And with attending any of our webinars, you'll receive free PDUs. Today's webinar, Tips and Tricks for Building an Effective Project Schedule, you'll receive a half PDU. And before we begin, I'm just going to review a few things to make sure you guys have a really good experience in our Webinar Wednesday session. So the control panel should be at the top right of your screen, and this gives you the option to adjust your volume and your screen and some other settings that you might find helpful. There's a chat window, a question window, those things. The audience is muted, so in order to ask questions, you'll have the opportunity to submit your questions via text in those text and chat windows. Send those questions anytime during the presentation, and we'll collect those and try to address those at the end of today's webinar. If we run out of time, Tim or I will be sure to answer those via email. And so now it's my pleasure to introduce the presenter for today's webinar, Tim Runcie. Tim is the founder of Advisicon and a Microsoft MVP for over 15 million consecutive years. And Tim is not only a Microsoft project expert and a terrific business owner, but he is one of the very best trainers that I've ever had the opportunity to learn from. And so without further ado, I'll hand this over to Tim so we can get this webinar started. Take it away, Tim.
Thanks, Pam. Welcome, everyone, to Webinar Wednesday. Very excited to be here with you today. In fact, my brain is actually very full after being on the East Coast working with Microsoft after the Ignite session. It is so exciting to start to see the floodgates of all these wonderful things that they've been holding on to about ready to be released for both project and project technology stacks. So today I'm going to take us right through key mindsets and scheduling best practices. We'll talk about how to work with this. And I'm going to touch upon several different key functional approaches. So a lot of times people start out project, they wrestle with some of these are fundamental. Some of them stem a little bit larger, which you'll be able to grow from. But again, lots of great opportunity. And as Pam mentioned, if you have questions anytime, reach out. So today we'll definitely talk about the mindset. So when you think about scheduling, if you're going to use project or in fact almost any scheduling tool, there are certain mindsets you need to approach with. And our focus is to be how to make project work for you and avoid scheduling pitfalls, how to leverage kind of the interface to make it work for you, and then things you typically won't find in a book. I'm going to give you kind of some updates that have to do with licensing, some elements that you're going to see that you may not have seen before. I'm also going to allude to some stuff that will be appearing very, very shortly. So we'll talk about elements that will enable. So again, that mindset of keeping your mind open and what is working is going to come out from there. All right, so speaking about mindsets, not every approach is right for you. So while people have creative ideas, we talk about what's black, what's white, and what is gray. And so one of the things, of course, is you can read lots of books. I have written plenty. We have a lot of our colleagues in other industries who've also written books. And sometimes we vehemently disagree on how things work. But in general, there's usually a right, a wrong, and then somewhere in the middle. And I encourage people to live somewhere in the middle to find what works best for you. The overall idea is you want to get in, get out, and get back to work, right? So if you're spending a lot of time wrestling with the tool, say Microsoft Project, you're doing something wrong. In fact, I usually have been using this statement, which is if you're spending more than 30 minutes once a week in managing your schedule, not building, not forecasting, not kind of doing what if scenarios, but really managing your schedule, you're doing something wrong. And that's part of our job today, is to help make sure you can pick up on some of those. So there are key pitfalls, and I'm going to jump right into my demo between my tool. But in using the project, there's things you just definitely want to avoid. And we'll talk about some of those, how they work, how to see them, and then just things that as you're working in large schedules or small schedules, how you can take advantage of that. So let's take a look at project. So as I'm opening up here a blank schedule, which most of you have seen when you start, you'll notice a few things is that, hey, I could get in here and start working right out of the gate. In fact, one of the things that we hear people say is, wow, we love this new mode that project's in. So if I start off with a project that says planning event management, and I hit enter, notice it's not filling out a duration or a start or finish. A lot of you who have been scheduling go, oh yeah, because it's in manual mode. And of course, the default settings when you first initialize or start project is to put everything into what we call a constrained mode or a manual mode. Now, the nice thing about it is this now tells project, even though it's a relational database, that this can behave like a spreadsheet. So for example, your duration, you could say, well, I don't know. And so instead of looking at numbers or dates, you can say, hey, this is TBD. You can begin filling this out. You can copy and paste from other systems directly in here and not have to fight the scheduling engine as you build that. So in terms of getting started, at least out of the gate, manual is a great concept. I also use this in agile planning where there's things I just want to move around. I don't want to deal with the constraint messages that pop up. But in general, as you begin to mature, your schedules will simply move out of what we refer to as our manual mode. So if I say, hey, this is a 6-day task, you can see over here on the right-hand side that as that changes, I get these database trying to help me out here. In fact, if I zoom this real closely, you can see I've got kind of some fuzzy edges around the outside here, which says, well, I don't have a start and a finish, but I can kind of suppose I've got enough information to begin building a time-phased, detailed, effort-driven cost modeling tool for you. Now, if you are able to figure out a start date or an end date, you can actually work from there. But the idea of a manual schedule is just that. So if I'm going to do planning, then I'm going to go ahead and say we're going to go ahead and do the event. And I love to put in a date here. We'll just say that's a 4-day activity. And then we decide to link these together, right? We'll talk about predecessor successors in a moment. Still in manual mode here, you notice the schedule is beginning to evolve. And so this is a great way to start out. In fact, scheduling best practices a lot of times is that you're pulling information from different sources. So while this is now filled in my start, my finish, it actually has something there. Here's some of the pitfalls. Again, if I change my task number 1 from 6 days to 10 days, suddenly you would expect in a dynamic schedule for this to ebb and flow, is that task number 2 should have picked up and moved. And of course it doesn't, right? So if you can look closely here, you can see there's a red squiggle telling you that, hey, look, if this was dynamic, that should move. You'll also see this little we call this the caterpillaring effect, because it looks like a little caterpillar's legs on the outside edge here saying, hey, that technically should probably move if you're in a dynamic schedule. Now, a best practice from scheduling is that as you begin to mature your projects, you could go in and click on the task mode and pick one after another, and that's fairly boring. Of course, if I come back here and change my days from 10 to 7, the dynamic schedule moves. But inherently, if you have a lot of those, 2 things will help you out. Number 1, just click on any column or highlight all the tasks you want to convert from manual to automatic, and then simply click on that auto schedule. Second, if you look down in the lower left-hand corner, a lot of people miss this, but you actually can go in to your option settings and just say all new tasks that come in are going to be auto-scheduled. So even here, I've highlighted all my 2 rows, which could be 2,000 or 200. If I insert a new row here and I say, hey, review plan with team, and I hit enter, if I haven't changed that, it comes in as a manual scheduled task, which can be quite annoying for those of us who are used to some of the old school approaches. So again, come down here, set that to auto schedule, then all new activities that you insert X, Y, Z, or X and Z, are coming in and auto-scheduled. So some very basics there to help you kind of get going out of the gate there. But again, from a planning perspective, if you're not worried about predecessor successors, it's very easy to take advantage of that. Second is we talk about moving things forward or backwards in time. So if I do the event, then I'll say event complete, and I had an activity here that just says 0 duration, is that the idea of scheduling, just like in Outlook, is about moving stuff forward and backwards. And from a scheduling perspective, from a PM perspective, the efficiency is how quickly can you get in and get out, is how much time does it take for you to progress, update, or move activities around. Very commonly people say, well, I need to move some things around, but look how easy this is. Click on row number 2 here, hit the drop down arrow and say, yeah, that's going to start on the 24th of next week. And it picks up and moves. It looks great, except what did it give you for your trouble? Well, if you look closely to the left here, it's inserted what's called a constraint. And for those of you that have done a little scheduling before, you'll start to realize that this is the kiss of death to a dynamic schedule. And what that means is if you've got a vendor who's sending you project schedules and you're kind of looking at incorporating their data in, if you look down the left-hand side and that symbol is all the way down here, then you're going to find that they basically have hard-coded the dates. So for example here, if I go and I link task 1 to task number 2 and say, hey, let's go ahead and get started, if I set up dates or I pick this up and go, you know what, it's not going to take 7 days, that was supposed to be 1 day for planning, notice how I've compressed my timeline, but row number 2 here is prevented from moving, right? It's prevented from moving left or right depending on the type of constraint that you set there. And so what's common is a lot of people will hard code their dates and things just won't move. They won't accurately progress, they won't update, and it's also another source of frustration is that the schedule is dynamic. The whole idea is that if this symbol here is all the way down the left-hand side, you might as well be using Excel because you've hard-coded all your dates. And while yes, we might be sitting on top of a relational database that gives us charts and graphs and timelines and dashboards, you still are going to struggle in your scheduling pieces. So a fast way, of course, to remove your constraints, and I'm going to show you the long way, then I'll show you the short way, is that the idea of any task is that if I double click on it, I've got this nice information about all the details behind the scenes. And remember, each row is a database record. So you've got 126 columns of information sitting there waiting to be updated. And the constraint type here is saying, hey, it's not as soon or as late as possible. Now, when I click on OK, notice the constraint disappears, change that to a shorter duration, and sure enough, it will move automatically. However, the fast way for this, let me undo all the way back where I've got a standard constraint here, is instead of double clicking, go to the advanced tab, picking as soon or as late as possible, just click on your start date, press the delete key, right? And that will remove your constraint. Now, if you didn't have your activities basically linked, and we'll talk about that in a moment, is that you're going to find that as you build your schedule, things need to move forward and backwards in time. So the idea, of course, is that you could certainly use your start dates. You can also go over here and just grab the bar and move that, and people go, oh, look how easy that is. Well, it's great when you're working in a high-level dynamic schedule that you can move things around. However, the minute you do that, you basically have started to hard code your dates. So pay attention to that. Very commonly, we see people walking through and making those changes, and then they're struggling with why things won't ebb and flow left or right. So what I usually encourage is that if you are building a schedule, hence the idea if there are relationships or dependencies, is that you can set yourself up with views that allow you to come in and say, bring the details in here. And I may want to look at a predecessor successor. In fact, here's something new for those of you that are on the latest updates from project, is that your predecessor and successor column no longer is just making you guess what that number is. You now have check boxes. You can come in and see the visualization of that. So what that looks like in a scheduling tool with actually some records here is I'll come over here, and yes, I can use Skype to talk to people, but if I click on the drop-down arrow, what I'm able to do, let me zoom this, is that I can now start taking advantage of, hey, look, it's this task, or I don't have to guess, was that row 37 or was that row 36? I can't really remember. It's visual, you can select and you can make those changes. Okay, getting back to basics here. Another element that's really a mindset, right, to get in, get out, and get back to work is that while you're setting up your schedule, it is important that you remember the future is in flux, right? You don't necessarily know what tomorrow will bring, right? 3 weeks from now, 6 months from now in your schedule. We do know what historically happened in the past. So in a sense is that if we're creating these relationships or dependencies, and I could say, hey, row number 2 is dependent on row number 1, and it makes a lot of sense that, hey, row number 3 probably should be dependent on row number 2, is that you can link these lots of ways. You can highlight them, and if you right-click, you'll actually see a little mini bar here where you can link them. You can come over and just put your mouse pointer in the center of a bar, drag, and go touch the task that you want to visually connect between each other. All of these are simply updating that predecessor successor column. And a best practice is to allow this to happen. And if you need to move things forward or backwards in time, we use duration, and we certainly allow people to modify the predecessors. What I like to see, and this is actually kind of a hidden thing you won't find typically in a book, is that if I double click on that link line, I can choose a start to start or a finish to finish, saying, hey, you know, these two tasks have the start date. They're going to start at the same time. I can actually start beginning doing both simultaneously. Or if I want to maybe say 2 days into this, I can get started with my lag or lead time. I can see that adjustment. Notice no constraints on the left. That's what we're trying to avoid. Now, the trick that I want to show you here is a lot of times in agile planning, or what we call a compressed schedule, basically crashing your schedule, is you may not know your lag or your lead time, but you might have a good idea when you're planning that says, you know, when they start these two tasks together, about 25% in. So I'm going to put plus 25% in the lag field here, is that, you know, I can start this about 25% into the predecessor task. And what this will do is it dynamically will adjust your lag or lead time. So for example, if this is 4 days, then 25% lag or lead, meaning that we're delaying or deferring earlier or later, is going to be 1 day. If I change this to 8 days, you notice that it's now a 2-day lag. So dynamically it says, you know, I can probably get this much closer than trying to actually find out the exact number of days to move things forward and backwards. And from a planning exercise, this gives you a little bit more flexibility by using some of those pieces in general. The final element that I want to talk about, of course, is in simple scheduling, is that when you're coming in here, a lot of people say, well, you know what, I've got a deadline. And while I might not be able to do a lag or lead time, maybe this is a finish to start, but I've got minus 25% overlap here. What I need to know is I have to have this done no later than the end of the week, which I think is Friday the 3rd. So if I want to, I can come in here and I could set a constraint that says must finish no later than, and I can pick a date here that says Friday, November 3rd, this can't slip. The problem is that in a dynamic scheduler, when you're building, is that anytime we hard code dates, if, for example, planning goes from 8 days to 22 days, right, you get these messages that pop up, says can't do it, scheduling conflict, and when you click on OK, because you don't have any other buttons to click on, it moves your schedule out, but what didn't move? That milestone, right? Still locked in place. So everyone else who's downstream from your planning event is thinking you're going to be on time. Or if this is a key critical kickoff meeting, the rest of the interconnected master schedules or linked activities, or if you're using Project Online or Project Server and you've got deliverables tied, this isn't going to move. So what we want to do is think in terms of the future, right? The idea is that, hey, listen, the future isn't set. Instead of coming in here and locking in a constraint, what we want to do is make the database do some work for us. And if you haven't seen this before, I recommend taking a look at your deadline, meaning that, let me zoom that again, that was a little fast. Zoom in the deadline, right? The whole idea is I can say, you know what, I need to not miss that November 3rd date. And when I click on OK, it gives you a nice visual to say, hey, look, I can actually tell you where your deadlines are. And if for some reason you're going to blow past that, let's say somebody says, well, I think that's really going to be not 7 days, it's going to be 12 days. And you go, no, not a problem. But if they had said 13 days, you go past it, your schedule isn't locked in place, you don't get a cryptic message, and you start getting visual alerts that say, hey, listen, this goes past its deadline. We can move and watch that. So a lot of executives love to see the fact that they can put deadlines or targets or even have a little bit of a dashboard. And what PMs also like about this is that if you do have a deadline and it looks like you're going to miss that, so as you can see here, I've got a deadline and my milestone slipped past it, what you can do is just come out here and drag that deadline, just move it out to the future. No one will ever know. See how easy that is to meet your deadlines? Really what I'm saying is that you've got a visual environment. You can use your Gantt chart to move or forecast where things are happening. And so versus, double clicking on it and going to a database field or right clicking and inserting a column, as you can actually see kind of where these are, where your targets are. So in a nutshell, these are the things that happen. And the number one mistake typically people make is they hard code their dates. I'm going to show you another best practice that will simplify scheduling problems. We get a lot of calls with this, is that in many cases, you have a wonderful summary task, right? A summary task is simply summarizing the activities that are happening underneath it. So for example, this says, hey, if I look at the schedule, 13 days plus 4 days is 13.75 days because we've got some overlap. It's telling us what's going on. But what a lot of times is people are highlighting or copying and pasting, pay attention. If for some reason you put your mouse pointer over the first couple letters of the task, you'll notice your mouse pointer will change into a double horizontal arrow, kind of right about here. And when you do that, when you're scheduling, if you're not paying attention, when you go to move it or highlight it, you could accidentally indent that, or you could accidentally outdent that. And when you do that, of course, what just happened, right? The task became a summary task or an indented summary subtask underneath that, and you could sit here and try and move those around and put them back where they go. Inherently, the idea is that what you've done is by the time we go through and say, oops, I indented it, let me put it back, it breaks the link. And so a lot of times people in scheduling have complex links, so pay attention with your mouse. The other is in a scheduling is you want your interface to be very helpful. So as I hop in here, let me pop out a couple key things around supercharging the interface of what you're working with project. Is that when you come in, you got to understand how the ribbon is set up. And then there's some really simple things that you can do in scheduling and project management with Microsoft Project that will actually help optimize your success. Number one, let's take a look at this from a interface perspective. Is I usually tell people, hey, when you first come in by default, have you ever noticed you're missing your entry bar? When I click on something that has multiple resources names or predecessors, I want to sometimes come up here and look at all the information. It's not there by default. So if you click on your File tab on your ribbon, and you'll go down to Options, there's a couple things that we find very helpful. Number one, go right to your display on what's called the backstage, turn on that entry bar. It'll be turned off, so you want to turn that back on. The other is that if you've got a lot of these little smart tags popping up here, it's a little annoying if you don't know project. They're helpful, but it's annoying for those of us who've actually worked with it for years that have these things that says, are you sure you meant to press the delete key? Did you want to delete a row or a column? Hey, you just changed the duration. Do you want me to go and update the work? If you understand about fixed units, fixed work, and fixed scheduling, these prompting are actually a little bit distracting. So I encourage you to turn them off as you don't need them. Turn your entry bar on, and then come down here, just double check to make sure your autosave is not turned on. By the way, autosave, the whole idea is that every few minutes it's going to save your schedule. And while I'm a firm believer of save early, save often, you clearly want to make sure that you're going through and not overriding this feature. One of the things that you may not have seen, and I encourage you to go check your settings, is that the undo level by default is set to 20 levels of undo. Now this is an office setting. That means PowerPoint and Visio all have this 20 levels of undo. You can go and change that, and I encourage you in Project to bump that up. Now if you think you're a really good scheduler in Microsoft Project, or you're really an expert at this, I dare you to change that to 1 and leave it for a couple days. It's really annoying, but the whole idea is you've got levels of undo, but autosave will overwrite that. Basically, it'll kind of wipe out your levels of undo. So while we're going back and kind of setting this up, and if I accidentally indent or outdent, I just say, look, if you've got that undo, just hit it, right? Don't worry in terms of where that was before. You've got a lot of flexibility in terms of dragging, dropping, moving, doing what if scenarios. That 99 levels of undo help tremendously. All right. The other is the ribbon itself. And I'm just going to say this simply is that if you look at the ribbon is now organized by what we refer to as a noun approach versus a verb approach. For example, Microsoft Word used to be all kinds of actions and menus. In fact, Microsoft Word is the reason we have a ribbon. There's just way too much stuff to put on there. So Microsoft created a context-sensitive menu. And when they first released it, it drove everybody bonkers because they couldn't find anything. But Project did not get the ribbon in the first Office release. They got that 99 levels of undo. So they learned from how and what the struggles were from the other Office group to simplify the ribbon by a functional area. And what I mean by noun versus verb is, what are you working with? Are you working with tasks? You click on the task tab. If you want to build an enterprise resource pool and assign resources, I bet you can't guess which tab you'll click on. The resource tab. And you'll add resources or pull them from local or from enterprise. If you want to go and look at the new dashboards and reports that come with Project, you've got all kinds of Excel charting, graphing, and pivoting that you can do right here inside a Project if you're in 2013 or higher. So all of these are helpful, but learn your interface quickly to find out what you're working with. And if you watch, for those of you that are on the 2016 version, you're going to see other tools starting to appear. Like Office 365 Planner now integrates with Project, so you can actually take activities and you can start linking and kicking off back and forth between the two. So a lot of new elements are coming back into play for you to work with. All right, so as we begin getting into a little bit of a wrap up here in terms of best practices, I've talked about building. Let's talk just about a couple things about progressing. And this is where that black, that white, and that gray area comes into play. So I want you to imagine that if somebody says never touch the start date, that sets constraints. Well, in the future, that is absolutely golden, right? Because the idea is the future is unset. I don't want to lose the overall duration of where things are at. I want to be able to work with it. But if I have something in the past, for example, planning or event management, if that's actually finished and today's date has moved forward, let's just pretend today's date actually moved forward. So let me just change today's date. And we're going to move it out to the 25th. You're going to see today as a progress line is that in many cases, anything in the left of today's date or left of a status date, we want to lock it down. And I don't care if you grab the start date, say, well, that really didn't start on Wednesday, it started on Thursday. And you pick it up and move it. And if you come over here and you say, let me just drag that percent complete up to today's date, or let me hit undo, so undo. If I come over to my task tab and say, hey, mark that on track, mark it done as of a status date or today's date. You can do this for one or multiple tasks, but the idea is we don't really care. Once we start marking a task a percent complete, it locks it in place. So what I usually tell people is get it there, whichever is the fastest, the easiest in terms of your starts or your actuals, because you're going to mark it done. And it's not going to matter whether it is or isn't constrained, because technically this thing is not going to pick up and move once I even put 1% complete on that. So the gray of this is really progress your schedule with what works well. Just keep that dynamic schedule in front of you where you aren't hard coding your dates or putting those in place. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about linking. We've talked a little bit about setting some of the options for durations. We marked a couple tasks. I love showing splits because a lot of times you want to tell that story. And then we're going to kind of take a look at some best practices here. So if you haven't split a task before, the idea is that if I need to pick up and move something, maybe I'm halfway progressed, if you come over here and say, hey, mark that on track, you can always just say, hey, mark it done as of today's date. But you can also go in, especially if you're updating your activities on your task and you're progressing your details, is that the whole idea is as I'm moving or marking it done, you'll notice it says, hey, move the incomplete parts to the status date or basically to today's date. So what this does is it creates a split. Now, a lot of times people don't know where that button is or on a different ribbon, but you can right click on your task, and I'll zoom this so you can see this a little bit better. Here's that mini bar. There's a split icon. Now, if you don't want to have somebody laugh at you or make fun of you, make sure you do this at home before you try this, is that when you hover over that bar, The idea is as you move your mouse pointer, it's going to give you the date of where it's going to pick up and move to. I have seen probably 50% of the people that try and use this feature come over here and they try and click on that box. They're like, click on it. Oh man, Tim, I can't get this to split. Well, that's a tool tip. So don't try and click on it. Just come over here. But you can literally click, grab and move, right click. You can split it again. You can tell what the story is, put a note in here and say, hey, listen, while I was in here, let's go to my notes detail, task split due to Hurricane Andrew. That's a no, that's dating me for a bit here, but the idea is if I throw an Andrew hurricane in here, that's what happened, here's what's going on, and we can tell that story. So the idea is, again, in the past, we really don't care how you move it. We're going to mark it done anyway, but in the future, please leave those ebbed and flows and take advantage of those deadlines. You're going to find other options for visualization. Okay. Now, things that we've talked about, I just want to kind of summarize it. You won't find in a book, and this is really when you're building your schedule, is that you want to learn from your mistakes, of course, but don't fear the schedule, right? If you've got 99 levels of undo, you can put it back. So when you know you're comfortable to break all the links, relink all the links, move things around, you know you've kind of arrived at a place where it's easy to break, it's easy to fix. The idea is you can play with that. Larger and larger schedules, this is where you need to have that comfort level of that you set this up. And of course, project itself is a database. You can sort, filter, and group, which we will be teaching in other sessions. But again, a good schedule should be something that makes sense. You can look at a forecasting. It isn't hard-coded, and the whole look and feel of your schedule is as you put that together, whoops, let me bring it up here, is that you can do things that say, well, yes, I can promote a task to the timeline, and I share that with some people. The rest is that it makes sense as it's laid out, as you're kind of organizing your work and your activities. Remember, your ribbon allows you to turn on and off critical tasks. You can come over here and turn on and off your baselines. You've got some great tools to play with. So the ribbon will help complement those pieces together. All right, so a couple final things here. Since we are entering into the 21st century, remember that Microsoft Project and the product team that owns it is not just working on a single tool called Microsoft Project or Project Online. They're integrating things like Wunderlist, or now called Microsoft To Do. They've launched Planner, which is another Office 365 tool that allows you to come in and begin to synchronize between the two. And if you are buying licensing for Project today, all licensing allows you not just to use the desktop tool, but you can also come back out and leverage other tools in that Office 365 environment. So the idea is that even though I'm saving my project to a SharePoint site or my desktop, you literally could be publishing them into Project Center or Project Online and using one common resource pool. So a little bit of training, some lightweight setup, and you can actually start to set yourselves up to say, hey, look, all my schedules are in one place. And you know what? If I want to go ahead and use some Power BI and I want to look at my data, I want to create better or dynamic reports, you've got a lot of things that are available for you to quickly set up and visualize your information, including dashboards that look like this, where you've got your numbers simply rolling up. And if you want to drill into issues, risks, or demand or capacity planning, this data is now simply connected and available where you can visualize this. So if you have 365 and you don't know how to do this, you're missing just a little bit of knowledge. And I just say, pick up the phone, call. Many cases, you'll see some blog posts where we're guiding people, say, hey, move your projects out of your desktop back into your enterprise environment. All right, so in summary today, I want you guys to be thinking, make project work for you. Get in, get out, and get back to work. If you're spending 30 minutes more wrestling with your schedule, there's something you don't know. There's a gap in some of that knowledge. And definitely try not to hard code your dates, right? Use your deadlines. When possible, certainly move into a manual mode if it helps you manage your agile tasks that stay within a sprint. Or as you guys are about to see, you're going to see Kanban boards in Microsoft Project where you can drag and drop things internally to project in a nice visual view. But the idea is it's still a database, and you want to make sure you're looking at what your dependencies are. So use your links when possible, and of course toggle in and toggle out of that manual mode when you're done. Of course, if you've got options, turn on your 99 levels of undo and take advantage of making sure the ribbon and the tabs are there and have exactly what you need to. With the new licensing model, if you buy Project Desktop or Project Online, it says Project Pro for Project Online, you get the full enterprise without having to pay extra funding. So there's a lot of benefits that you can certainly pick up and move from there. So Pam, thanks for the opportunity again to just reach out and share. I know I kind of did this in condensed format, so we know these are going out to YouTube, but let me hand it back to you to kind of wrap us up today and see if there were any questions.
Well, Tim, I'm going to give you one question here. If you can pull up the schedule that you created for the demo, I have a question about the percentage of lag. So when you enter a percentage lag, is it based solely on scheduled dates or on work accomplished?
Perfect. So remember, the lag has to do with the deferring of tasks, meaning that is, so I start or finish later. So if I put a couple days, let's just put a couple days of lag here, what it does is it pushes that off. Or if I add negative lag here, so I put in minus a couple days, it's saying, hey, the start or finish of that activity is going to be plus or minus off of the start or finish of the predecessor task. The key is the predecessor task. So your question was, hey, what about that percent? Well, that percent has nothing to do with work, has nothing to do with percent complete. It simply looks at the predecessor and says, when I want to move the start date left or right for the successor task, what does that look like? So if I put in plus 25 in the percent symbol, it says the finish of task number one's date takes the entire duration of task number one and gives 25% buffer, or basically it moves that out. So in this case, it'll move that milestone. This is, of course, I pick a task that's 8 days. That's not too bad. Should be a 2-day push, right? So if I look here, it would have moved this out by 2 days. Inherently, if I did minus 25%, it would have moved in by 2 days. The key is that percentage looks at the predecessor task and then applies that right to this lag or lead time. That's a great question. And nothing to do with work or work percent complete. It's just a scheduling that has this help. How can I find out when it's going to start or when is it going to finish?
That was great, Tim. Thank you, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. We do encourage and welcome your questions and your suggestions, and we do want your feedback. For more information, please contact Advisicon through our website. Or you can email us or give us a call. Tim Renzi or I will be sure to get back to you if there's anything we can do to help out. Once you exit today's webinar, you'll receive a survey on the presentation, and we would appreciate it if you would complete and submit the survey in order to get those free PDUs. You'll also receive a follow-up email on Friday with a link to view a recording of today's webinar and all of the PDU information. So on behalf of Advisicon, Tim and myself, we thank you for joining us today and hope to see you participate in future webinars. Have a great rest of your Wednesday, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.